Hello, I am Mantastic and Fantastic, and today I'm going to be talking about power creep and how it's been affecting Arena 3. So, my very first clear of Arena 3 occurred in early August of 2016 with Miru. And since then, I've actually used a wide variety of different teams and leaders to actually clear and subsequently farm Arena 3. And in all honesty, Arena 3 used to be the hardest dungeon in the game, as it featured an amazing array of spawns with radar dragons that were almost uncounterable by the majority of leaders available. However, at this point in time, we now have countless options to farm Arena 3, and it seems a little strange that it's become like Pad has transitioned to a game of farming Arena 3 when it is over 8+ months old. So maybe Gung was doing this to basically help bring everyone back up to speed with power creep. Basically, Arena 3 came out, hardly anyone could actually clear it, let alone farm it, and now they've made it become easier and easier and more accessible that the majority, well, like it's starting to become more and more players are actually able to tackle Arena 3. So I feel like Gung has put a major pause in terms of dungeon power creep, and instead just power creeped all of the leaders and cards up significantly so everyone can tackle this challenging dungeon. So, like I mentioned, there are probably the vast majority of leaders can now clear Arena 3 at least with a Hail Mary style if they get very lucky spawns. And for myself, my big three I've used to clear Arena 3 have been Miru, Mary, and now Dark Athena. So basically this whole video and subsequent article is basically just going to examine how power creep has affected Arena 3, as well as highlighting those three leaders' strengths, weaknesses, and just kind of showcasing how things have gotten progressively stronger and stronger as time has gone on. So, Arena 3 has been live in North America / EU for probably 8-9 months, maybe at this point, I forgot, but at the time of its release, it was the hardest dungeon in the game. Hardly anyone could actually tackle it, and even to this day, it still remains the hardest playable content outside of the future 3-player co-op in Japan and Colosseum. But Colosseum is rarely played, and in all honesty, it's mostly a very large stalling festival. It's a matter of just recharging actors and bursting for high amounts, and having a leader that can actually overcome combo shields. It's not as horrible as is maybe like you initially thought it was. Like, it was very exciting to play through it, of course, but it does have inherent weaknesses, most notably that you can stall on lots of floors, and just it's a grinding dungeon. So, right now, it's still Arena 3. That's all we really play at this point in time. That is considered endgame content, but it's a very old dungeon. Unfortunately, I guess, or fortunately, Arena 3 does offer the best rewards. It gives you a pre-draw, a killer Leighton now, a tan, a pie, lots of gold, and massive amounts of rank experience. So, in theory, like, it's the most lucrative dungeon to actually play through. And now that they've made it more accessible in terms of the cards and leaders available, people are at least starting to catch up to that meta, and everyone's starting to taste end-game content. And killer Leightons have now become kind of the in thing, with newer teams emerging that are relying on, say, dragon killers and subsequently physical killers on Dark Athena teams to help make things easier. But you don't need them for success, they just make things easier. So we're basically playing a hard dungeon to acquire things to make it easier. That seems kind of weirdly counterintuitive in a way, because it was almost like when people started playing SDR farming. Some people complained, oh, I can't farm SDRs because I don't have SDRs. But you really could. But SDRs at least had applications outside of farming Special Descend Rush. Whereas Arena 3, it's like the killers make it so you farm Arena 3 easier, which I think is weird. Maybe it's hopefully setting up for the next big thing. So, catch-up and power creep. So I honestly feel like Pad is in a big catch-up mode, in that the majority of players are now starting to tackle Arena 3 because we now have shinier and flashier cards and leaders. Because new abilities have now emerged that have somewhat trivialized how challenging Arena 3 used to be. Gemstone princesses are stronger, we now have Fujin, and a lot of the mechanics and high health pools are now negated because we now have leaders that are able to output tremendous amounts of damage. So I honestly feel that Puzzle & Dragons is starting to become more of a rolling game and not as much of a playing game anymore, because we're just acquiring new cards to play the same old content easier. And I feel that's a real shame, because we haven't had really much playable content. Like, yes, Colosseum did come out sometime since Arena 3 was released, but Arena 3 is 8 + 9 months ago. Colosseum is somewhere in between, maybe like 3 months ago. So what have we really had that's been released that's been challenging enough to at least advance dungeon power creep? So, in my opinion, Puzzle & Dragons still has the best gameplay of any either mobile game or like even just a regular console or other video game, because the puzzling aspect or manipulations is so amazing in the sense that different leaders like force you to think in different ways, and there's still to a certain extent a limitless skill cap ceiling because you have to think on the go, you have to match X number of combos, you want to try and optimize your board or control your damage, so it is a very exciting aspect of the game, and I do feel like Gung Ho is shying away from actually creating gameplay, and now it's rolling, and I feel like it's not an ideal scenario. And this is partially due to the fact that farmable cards are really not that important anymore. Outside of Miru and I guess perhaps Zerog Infinity, Zeus Dios, and Tengu, what is the real need to play dungeons to get farmable monsters when you just get the one-time clear and just roll because the reg machine is just that much more powerful? Maybe some people can argue that with inheritable farmables things change, but really they don't, because the inheritable farmable skills generally are more poverty options to a rare machine alternative. So again, it becomes a game of we're just rolling new cards to beat the same old content over and over again. With all that being said, I am still at least optimistic that Gung Ho is going to change things around. Perhaps the 3-player co-op in Japan is maybe a step in terms of at least introducing new hard content available, but we'll just see how it goes. Like, I haven't been following it too closely because I don't it's just a little foreign to me, and translating is not easy when you don't speak Japanese, but maybe that'll hopefully shake some things up. It will definitely push the game more towards certain high-end leaders, so maybe we can take this period of downtime to start prepping for teams that are actually going to be capable of clearing those new 3-player co-op dungeons. So, as promised, I'm going to basically be reflecting on my big 3 leaders I've used to clear Arena 3. And in order of clears, I basically use Miru, then Mary, and then Dark Athena. And in all honesty, all these teams still can clear and farm Arena 3 with great consistency. I did so with Miru, and now we have newer toys as well as flashier things, so Miru becomes even stronger and safer. Mary just got a new evolution, so more damage, and Dark Athena is just the poster girl of Powercreep. And these are the teams that I've had most success with. You do have to obviously take into consideration that my monster box is somewhat shallow and that I can never field a Raw Dragon, Kaede, Aizen teams because I don't even have those cards or their subs. So obviously if you have those leaders, you can obviously use those to great success, but these are the 3 that I have found most impactful for myself. And some examples of cards that have dramatically accelerated like the actual monster power creep is things like Fujin, because Fujin now has completely trivialized Hera Dragon. Hera Dragon is no longer a scary encounter. It's just simply an encounter that you press one button and instantly kill because it only has 30 million health. And 30 million health is actually quite small nowadays because we now have leaders that can hit millions upon millions with sometimes very little effort. So with all these new toys, it just makes these leaders more consistent and more stable overall. Now, I will be including videos of all my big threes clears, and I'm including videos of my very first clear, so it will at least showcase the leader of me, basically me learning the leader as I go along, because it was my first clear. I've only actually just started playing them pretty much maybe that day or the day before, so it's all somewhat new to me. So, Miru was my very first team I ever used to clear Arena 3, and it was partially because I was lacking any high-end leader, because the best I had is probably DQXQ or Blue Sonya, and maybe RNG barring, I could clear Arena 3 of those teams, but it's not very feasible overall. And one nice thing about Miru is that she's farmable, she has a very flexible team build, in that you can use TPA or row subs, so it's quite accessible overall because you don't have to worry about finding a leader. You have the leader because it is farmable, and basically these pros and cons I'm going to list is kind of taking into consideration how she fits presently today. So her TPA team is definitely superior, but the row team obviously still works, and it's the row team that I used, and it was quite viable overall. Her team building is flexible, she's very tanky and durable because that Heart Cross effectively means she has 4 times health, 4 times recovery. She has very easy stalling in that you can control your damage in the sense you don't match a Heart Cross, you don't deal damage. You make a Heart Cross, you don't take damage. She is farmable, she is bind immune, and she can deal with all the Radar Dragon spawns, and she does have viability in solo mode. However, her biggest drawbacks or cons are that she struggles to deal burst damage without active skills. So that is probably most notable against, say, Hippo Dragon or Hephaestus Dragon and Gaia Dragon, where you have to hit for incredibly high amounts of damage, and if you're lacking actives or you don't have gemstone inherits, it may be quite challenging overall. You also have a lower combo count because Heart Cross takes up space. If you're going row based, you again lose more space. She's quite slow to play and orb hungry. Again, you need 2 different elements in quite high amounts, 5 hearts plus 4 to 6 light orbs. And generally speaking, people probably don't like heart crosses because it's not an intuitive playstyle. And lastly, Gung-Ho has started to punish heart crosses because they just don't output enough damage. I think Colosseum is a great example. Heart crosses don't flourish well in Colosseum. So basically, Miru is the leader I used extensively in 2016. I probably have well over 100 clears just in 2016 alone with Miru. I had other leaders like Krishna and Lakshmi and UNY, but it was mostly Miru for all of 2016. And I have definitely sidelined her nowadays because I now have faster leaders that can clear the same content just as quickly and relatively as consistently. Obviously, Miru is very safe, but I don't need to default to Miru anymore because we now have faster options. And because of the way Pad is, we need to play dungeons over and over again. And if you can save several minutes per encounter, you're going to be doing that leader over something that is slow by comparison. So basically, here's my very first clear of Arena 3. It was on August 6th of 2016, so it's very old. Next is Mary, and Mary was the second team I used extensively to farm Arena 3. This happens, I think, around February of 2017, and she is very safe and very stable, and one thing I like about her, or the aspect I like about her the most, is the no Skyfall clause, because that yields to faster clear times and perfect damage control. Now, Arena 3 is riddled with very numerous absorption or damage void encounters, and being able to control your damage perfectly is invaluable. Like, it will save you time, it will save you active skills, and it'll probably prevent you from dying because you should never be dealing too much damage if you understand your leader well. And in addition to all of that, Mary can sweep almost every single floor outside of wood bosses with just a single row of water orbs and other combos. So in terms of orb hungriness, she does require a certain amount of orbs, but it's quite fast if you can at least match the board. And furthermore, any orbs that fall down will not trigger a match. So if you Skyfall a water combo, it doesn't actually match and you have them ready for the next floor. You obviously can then abuse Skyfall active skills or even the Kappa on floor 1 for water Skyfalls, and you actually save yourself a lot of time moving forward. Finally, she does have 6.25 times recovery, so basically you can heal up to full from any amount of health with just 3 heart orbs because you're healing for a stupendous amount of health every single match. Unfortunately, she is obviously not without faults because she does have issues with solo gameplay, mostly because she has no SBR on herself, so your team build is a little restrictive. She has no health multiplier, so it makes tanking DQ Hera impossible unless you stack Dark Resist Latents. And she does have a vulnerability to binds. Now, that is problematic overall, but that's not to say she cannot clear Arena 3 in solo, it's just less consistent, and she does have somewhat of a dependency on co-op for speed and success. So in terms of the pros, there's the perfect damage control, that comes in part of the no Skyfalls, fast and consistent in co-op. 6 water orbs kills almost everything, you have huge burst damage, especially with this new evolution, massive recovery, stalling is a breeze, and you can deal with all the radar dragons because you have massive damage output. And if you get the Kappa on floor 1 with the water Skyfalls, your life is going to be so easy. I've had like 15, 16-minute clears of Marys just because I had beautiful Skyfalls in co-op mode. So co-op makes things slower because of the passing of turns. In terms of cons, there's no health multiplier, no skill bind resist. Solo mode becomes quite challenging because those are 2 big factors that make a leader powerful. And in solo mode, you have less counters or options to dealing with those. She does have a vulnerability to binds, and her combo count is lower unless you actually use her active skill, which can be viewed as a con to a certain extent. So, even though I do own a Dark Athena, I do find myself kind of flipping back between Mary and Dark Athena, just because a lot of the content, because we are replaying old content over and over again, has been somewhat mapped out perfectly. I know how to deal with everything in Arena 3 perfectly with Mary, I know how to deal with Machine Hera perfectly, so on and so forth. So, Mary still has a lot of appeal to me, and I still probably be using Mary for a long time to come. And as promised, here's my solo Arena 3 clear of Mary. It was my very first clear of Mary in Arena 3, so again, it may look a little choppier overall because I was basically playing that leader fresh from the Rare machine. And last, and certainly not least, is Dark Athena. And Dark Athena is basically the living embodiment of Powercreep. If you were to Google Powercreep, you might find a picture of Dark Athena in all honesty, because she combines easy activation, amazing burst damage, innate tankiness, and Bind Immunity all into one leader. She's quite hard to actually stop, and even though that there are optimal teams for Dark Athena with certain inherits and subs, you can easily get away with a less than perfect team because she's just so overwhelmingly powerful. And ideal or optimal teams exist because it allows you to farm a certain dungeon more efficiently. It just lowers the chances of failure or makes you have a bigger window for amount of combos you need to hit. Within a perfect or ideal team, you can make fewer combos, and it's more forgiving because you have so much more damage because of the TPA and 7 combo awakenings if you try to pursue that. So for myself, I'm actually quite surprised. I actually have a very powerful and viable Dark Athena team. Normally speaking, I generally use second-rate cards for all of my teams, and sometimes second-rate leaders. But for Dark Athena, I have nearly the optimal team for Arena 3, so that actually makes me quite happy and excited. And my first playthroughs this week have been pretty smooth overall because she's just such a powerful leader. And in fact, when I was writing this article, I actually took basically a 12-minute break, and I cleared Arena 3 in about 12 minutes. Basically, every floor was a one-shot. I danced around on 1 or 2 other floors, but it was very easy overall in solo mode. So, she does have great damage control. Not as perfect as Mary, but still strong overall. She can use 3 Hakus. You do have one of the best, if not the best, solo mode team for Arena 3. Your clears are amazingly fast and consistent. And if you do a Dark TPA plus 1 water combo, you kill most things. You don't even need to combo hard. You just roll over most of the spawns in Arena 3. You can abuse the 7 combo awakenings from Hakus and Lokis, and you are able to actually combo a board, unlike, say, Miru, who is forced to make awkward patterns. You do have 2.25 times health, so you are able to tank most hits. I have 64,000 health in solo mode, so that's amazing. Like, I can tank basically any non-giant execution hit with ease. You are bind immune, and you have a built-in delay. Unfortunately, the small cons Dark Athena has is no skill bind resist, so again, you have to build a team accordingly. And in solo mode, if someone's bound, you are going to get your skills locked potentially. Your recovery component is conditional, and I'll explain that more in a moment. And because of that, stalling is not as ideal because that recovery is conditional. You have naturally low time extend, and your active actually has very low value against the Kalis or Radar Dragons. So Dark Athena is definitely my easiest and strongest solo Arena 3 team I have available. And basically, barring no water skyfalls on floor 1, she is the fastest out of all of my teams. Mary is very fast if I get the water skyfalls because you can just like 1 or 2 combo every floor and just have water orbs every turn. But Dark Athena is also the least orb hungry because she uses only 3 water and 3 dark, and that can kill a lot of things. In theory, 3 water, 3 dark, 7+ combos will mow through content. Dark TPA, 3 waters will kill most things as well. Don't even need 7 combos. So, makes things very fast and very smooth, and if you have killer latents, it just makes things even easier overall.
Feast your eyes on the amazingly crisp and thin Chips Ahoy Thins!
What the heck? Anywho, must have a tab or window open. But all this does come with a little bit of downsides because the recovery component forces you to bring water and match water and dark, which is how you deal damage. So when you're trying to heal, you have to deal damage. So the easiest way to overcome this problematic stalling scenario is tank hits until you're about to die, and then on that turn, match your hearts, match your water dark, sweep the floor. Because otherwise you might take a risk of chipping away at an encounter and then getting killed by an execution. So it's best to let yourself get to low health, then heal to full with matching the whole board. That's how I deal with stalling with the Dark Athena. It's not as perfect as, say, Mary, but you only need, say, 2 to 3 turns, and life is somewhat easy at that. Like, you still can kill the floors, but at least you get some turns out of it. So, the last thing I want to mention is that because she has no time extend built in, her ideal team has no time extends as well, for the most part. You are going to have issues matching things quickly because if you're not used to having no time extends, life may be a little challenging. But here's my second clear of Dark Athena in solo mode. I didn't record the first one, but this is my first recorded clear, and I use this exact team setup, and it has certain latents and inheritance, basically because that's what works well for me. I have some notes basically saying the wood resistor for Gaia Dragon, and Indra is definitely better than Susanoo, and Facette's better than Carrot. But if I had those 2 things switched, I'd have the ideal team, so that's actually quite nice for me. So, in conclusion, Arena 3 is slowly being power creeped into a more easily farmable dungeon just because we have newer and flashier cards available. what used to be millions of health now looks like a limp piece of paper because we now have leaders that can explode for damage with minimal effort. So this is great for players overall because the majority of players are now getting to play catch-up or having almost like a reset button in terms of power creep because now they can farm Arena 3, you can start enjoying the end game content, and you're happy overall. And unfortunately for like those people who have been farming Arena 3 for months, it's just kind of a period of waiting for newer things to be released and just kind of hoarding up materials, having things ready to use on day one when they are released. So I do honestly believe Gung-Ho will start pushing out challenging content again to be played, and maybe 3-player co-op will change that a bit because I do honestly feel like PAD is a little bit of a standstill because we're just basically encouraged to play the same dungeon over and over again 8-9 months later. So, what do you think about the state of the game and how power creep has occurred in Arena 3? Let me know in the comments below. Hopefully you all have a mantastic day, and happy puzzling!